Welcome to another session about the EventSentry Management Console. In this session, we're going to look at the groups, how to manage groups, what types of groups there are, and so forth. So after you open the Management Console, you can see the groups contained down here. We also have a tab on the ribbon, of course, which we can click. And once you click on the groups, you see a list of all the groups, including the computer count, how many hosts are in there, a number of assigned packages, and so forth. EventSentry ships with a number of groups by default. There's a default group, service group, network devices. You can rename those, you can delete those. They're not hard-coded. The names really don't mean anything. So you can create as many groups as you would like, obviously with some hard limits, and name them any way you want. You cannot nest groups, so there's only one level of groups allowed. But if you need a more granular way to assign packages, then you can use tags, and that's something that we'll get into a little bit later. So here on this system, you can see slightly different icons here for the groups. So we have a couple of groups here. They start with Docker, so these are some Docker containers that are simply just sending log data to this EventSentry installation. And you can see a little play icon here. So this basically indicates this is a manage agents only group. And what that means is that the heartbeat agent that is usually installed will not monitor the hosts in this group. So these are virtual machines that are running on a remote system. We do not need to ping those machines in this particular case. So that's why this is set to a manage remote agents only group. Okay, so both of these are the same. And if you click them, you can already see the statistics here. You can assign packages, set variables, and so forth. We'll get into that. There's a summary about the maintenance schedules. Are there any maintenance schedules active right now in that group? Which packages are assigned to all hosts in the group? And of course, if we expand a group, then we're going to see the hosts that are inside the group as well. Then here we have a network devices group. So that's for devices that are not running Windows agents. And the reason why we distinguish is because there's different types of actions that you can do against network devices versus Windows devices. For Windows devices, we can manage agents, install them, remove them, restart them, and so forth. We don't obviously have agents for things like firewalls and switches and printers. Right, so this is why there is that distinction. Here we have a full monitoring group. So that means this group includes hosts. And let me expand that here a little bit. So here we have two servers and the local EventSentry machine. So those two servers are being fully monitored by the heartbeat agent. That's why it says full monitoring. And the group is also integrated with an Active Directory OU. So if you make changes to that OU, let's say remove or add another server, the next time you go into the Management Console and do any sort of remote action, that new host will appear in that group. So it's a very convenient way if you have a volatile group of mostly usually workstations, for example, that are being added and removed on a regular basis, then it definitely makes sense to link that group to Active Directory. And then finally, we have yet another variation. So now we have a manage agents only group that is linked to Active Directory. So again, here we have a single workstation that we don't care to monitor. We don't really care if it's running or not. It's a workstation, but we're still linking this to Active Directory. So here, it's just a test path hosts, workstation, versus here we have hosts and servers, right? So that's it, on the different groups in this system. We can add a group through the ribbon here. And of course, we can also right click and choose add group. And we can say test group here. And when you create a group, you have the option of determining, are we managing Windows hosts in that group, or do we just have network devices, or do we do both? So monitoring in this case would also apply to Windows devices. So once you create that group and you click it, it says full monitoring. It's not linked to Active Directory, so that's why we don't have that user symbol added, and we don't have that play symbol either because it's not just a remote update group. How do we add computers? Well, if it's linked to Active Directory, then you don't have to do anything. The actual linking process to Active Directory will bring the computers in, and I'll illustrate that as well. Otherwise, we have another couple of different options of adding computers. We can manually add a host by simply clicking the, add button, and we can just call this server. And if that host name is resolvable, then we don't have to do anything else. If not, then you can put in an IP address, and again, this is just for testing purposes, and then the host is added. Here's a little thing to keep an eye on. You notice that I added and I specified an IP address in the icon, and by the way, the IP address shows up there under the host name, and the icon of that computer is slightly different than the other icons. So a good example would be here. So here, this is a plain icon in one color versus this one has two different colors, and that indicates that an IP address is associated with that host name. You may have noticed that there was a trusted host in a notes field. So let's take a look at that. So I'm going to click Edit and bring that dialog back up again. So notes is something you can just, you can just write some brief description of that host for somebody else. If you have multiple team members, you can write on there, okay, this is just a test server. Or you could write things like location of that server, service contracts, serial numbers, and so forth. Although some of those are automatically determined by EventSentry for Dell and similar hardware manufacturers. And then we also have the trusted host checkbox. So this is useful in scenarios where you want to transfer the entire configuration that you have here to that host in case they're running components other than just the agent. The majority of your servers in your environment are just going to run the agents, and they're not going to need certain information such as passwords to access the database directly. But if you have a remote server, a remote network where you need the EventSentry components to talk directly to the database, then you will need to check that trusted host checkbox. So we'll hit OK. So the notes, of course, show up there, and they'll also show up in the web reports. Another way to add computers is through the import functionality. So when you click the import button here, then you're presented with this dialog. You can click import file, and then here it shows you what that file should look like. One host name per line, optionally with the IP address followed with a comma. So that's one option. That's one way to do it. There's really nothing to illustrate here. And then we can link it to Active Directory, and we can do a network scan. In fact, I need to go back here so you can import from Active Directory, so you do not have to link it. So that's another stop. So if you have an OU with 50 servers, you don't want to link it because it never changes, then you can simply import and use Active Directory as your source. Or you can click that button, and then you'll end up with what we have over here for the workstation and the servers, which means the group is always going to be in sync with Active Directory. And finally, we have the network scan option, where we can put in a range of IP addresses, and it will scan the network and present the hosts to be added to the EventSentry configuration. If ping is blocked on those machines, so you would do something like 192.168.1.0, let's say 24. So it scan from .1 to .254 to see if there's what it finds. It will present those computers that it found, and it will also try to resolve their IP address and show the FQDN, of course, of those computers. If ping is not active on those hosts, then you can also specify TCP ports. So for example, you could do port 445 for Windows hosts, port 222 for network devices, for example, and you can also restrict the devices that are showing up based on the MAC vendor. For example, if you're trying to import just HP Canon printers, then you could just write Canon here, and it will only show you devices that have been resolved or identified as Canon printers. And the scan is pretty fast, and yeah, you just simply add them to the list. So let's take a look at Active Directory, what that looks like, for example. So here you're just simply presented with your Active Directory tree here. there's not really much to display here because I believe, oh yeah, so here is a computer, DC1 2002, that could be added. But of course, that's a domain controller, right? So we are going to hit cancel here. We're going to delete this group, right click, delete group, or of course, simply go up here. Are you sure you want to delete this group? We're going to say yes. We're going to say we don't need to remove agents. There's no agents on there. It resets, and now we're going to create a new group. We're going to call it add group, and we're going to call it domain controllers. We're going to click the import button again. Click Active Directory. We're going to link it this time. Click on domain controllers. You have some options about including subcontainers, subgroups, if that's desired. You can actually also link to a group in Active Directory. It does not have to be an OU. We hit next. It's going to be linked. And we'll see here, oh, that computer shows up here now. Don't worry about sorting the groups. The next time you open a management console, all these groups are going to be sorted alphabetically. So now we have the group here. With the host in there, we can do a check status. And how it works with any of these actions here, you pick an action, check status, deploy agents, and so forth. You hit the go button. And with go, you actually start the process. And what we get here is that the service is actually not yet installed. But that's a topic for another video. Now you're familiar with how the groups work, how you manage the groups, and so forth. A last thing to maybe briefly go over, but that goes a little bit more into the heartbeat monitoring. You can go into the group heartbeat configuration here and change the settings. So if you decide that you wanted to, enable this option here and actually do ping those hosts, then you can go in there and make that change. Same goes for monitoring agents and so forth. So it's not set in stone. When you create the group, you can change that later.